Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending the June DevCast webinar here at Genesys. My name is Jim Crispino. I'm the Senior Director of Developer Evangelism here, working on the App Foundry Marketplace team. The topic for this month's DevCast is Unleashing the Power of Genesys Cloud Analytics. So we're going to cover the Analytics API and how to use that inside of Genesys and how to use that externally for your own data needs. So before we hop into that, I have a few topics to cover. So let me get there. We will have I'll try and keep a 10-minute Q&A at the end. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A tool, not the chat. Use the Q&A tool of Zoom. Put your question in there because that'll queue it up and I can answer it during the webinar or offline. Also, we are recording this. We upload all of these to our Genesys Community YouTube channel. You can find these videos as well as some of our other video series on the Developer Center, which you should all be familiar with at developer.genesys.cloud under the video link there. And then lastly, we will have our next DevCast. The registration will be open in the middle of July or so. It'll come out in our newsletter. So if you're not signed up with our newsletter, you can do that on the Developer Center. You can just search for newsletter in there. It'll help you sign up. And if you have any thoughts of topics you'd like to see, you can always fill out our survey or email Janessa Barrera at genesys.com, and she will collect those topics, and we'll see that we get somebody signed up to present that topic sometime later this year. All right, with that, I am going to stop sharing this screen. Give me a second. I'm going to hop over to my other screen. And where did my Zoom go? Give me a second, folks. Sorry. All right, share this screen. So we're going to hop right into it. I don't really have any slides. As typical, I don't have any slides. I'm going to start off. Can somebody in the chat, I know I told you all to use the QA. Can somebody in the chat, can you tell me if you see my browser with the Developer Center on it? Or use the reaction tools of Zoom or something to that effect? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. So I love all the little thumbs up. All right. On the Developer Center, analytics is one of our most popular topics with Genesys. As you can imagine, contact centers live and die by analytics, by reporting on how many interactions were they handled properly, what was the sentiment, what was the wrap-up code, average handle time, all of those statistics. Those are KPIs, proof points that your operating center, your contact center is operating at the utmost efficiency that it can. And it can also be used to point out weaknesses where improvements can be made. So analytics is very important. It is one of the largest topics on our developer forum, where developers like yourselves can post questions to our forum, and our teams chime in and answer those. So on our Developer Center, if you scroll down past the first block of major links, analytics and data management is our first most popular topic. So if you click on that, it takes you to our topic over here in the table of contents, and analytics is over here. So I want to point out some things because as a developer, I make this mistake all the time. My boss will come to me and say, Jim, we need this report. We need a report that does this on this system. And so I'll hop out to that system. I'll find their developer page. I'll find their APIs. I'll see an example of maybe what I should do. And I'll think that sample is the end all be all. I'll throw that in some code, compile it, kind of get started. And I fail to go and read the details about the APIs and the tips and tricks of using the API properly, because I saw this example and I just ran with it. So I'm guilty of making that. I would assume other developers do the same. Maybe that's the wrong assumption. But come here to the Developer Center, our analytics team has worked tirelessly to really populate really good detailed documentation on how to properly use the analytics API. The first one, which a lot of people blow by, is just the overview of how the analytics API works and what it's designed to do. We'll get into some details later, but we actually have kind of two ways to go about getting data. One's more of a real-time and one's more of a historical. But read through the overview as well as some of the other articles. So we've got different kinds of queries on our system. We have what we call detail queries. Those are right here. So those are you're getting the raw data. You want to get all the calls or all the interactions that have happened for a day. You want all the details about all those conversations, or you want details about all the users that logged in today and were on queue, in the customer support queue. You want the details of those users or the details of those conversations. So those are details queries, and you're going to get all the raw data, nothing aggregated, no metrics calculated, just the raw interaction data or the raw user data that you can then feed into another system that might aggregate that and perform metrics calculations on the raw data. So we have detailed queries. We also have observation queries. So observation queries are queue observations, probably our most common observation query. It's how many users are on a queue? How many users are in a certain state? How many are waiting for a call to come in? How many are interacting? How many are in a certain status? So it's more of a metrics calculation. You're going for a specific type of metric related to a queue or a user status or something. So those are observation queries. And then the last kind of category of queries that we have are aggregate queries. So those can be conversation aggregates, user aggregates, and we have a lot more now than we've ever had. You can get aggregate queries on your bot performance, on your call flow performance, on customer journeys, on surveys. And aggregates are a count of how many, let's take conversations, right? How many conversations had a certain wrap-up code, or what was the number of answered calls from a certain queue. There's many ways to aggregate data, and you can do aggregates on certain time frames, like aggregated every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes or every hour. It'll count all of the conversations in that time period. So those are our three categories. If you're going after data, look in those categories and look at how to go about getting the data that you need for the type that you're getting. Our analytics APIs, the actual APIs themselves, are here. And if you scroll down this list, it's pretty extensive. We've got quite a bit. There are two types of queries. I want to show you. I'll just point out the conversation ones first. So query, if we were going after the conversation details, so that's the raw data of a conversation. We have two types that will return that data. We have this one called conversation details query. This runs against the real-time database. So it will include everything today, and it will do historical. It can go back in time, but it will include conversations that happened today. However, with conversation details query, the index on that data store does not include all of the conversation data. And one of the primary things missing from conversation details query is the ability to search on attribute data. So attribute data is, say you're in a call flow and you're collecting an account number and you did a lookup on a CRM to get a little more data about that user, and you attached all that data to the call as attribute data so that it travels with the call through your contact center. That custom attribute data is not queryable, and fairly certain it's not even returned on the results of the details query. So there's fields like that that just are not available in that real-time data store. It's designed for efficiency and usage by many of our other microservices around Genesys Cloud. So it has to be ultimately performant. So it leaves out some of the details, even though it's called a details query. It does leave out some of the details. So the second one we have is on a nightly, every night, we do an ETL job, right? These are databases. So we have an ETL job that runs, and it takes all of the data from our real-time store and extracts it and moves it over to a different data store that is better at being queried and more flexible. And it allows for a broader range of queries where you can actually query on those custom attributes and get that data back. And that's called a jobs query. So that runs asynchronously. That data store doesn't have to be as performant as our real-time one. So it kind of runs asynchronously. It can take some time to get the results, not a lot of time, seconds, not minutes or hours. But if the API endpoint ends in jobs, that means it's going to be an asynchronously operating query. You can still use the same structure of the query to get the data, but it'll run asynchronously, and you'll have to get the results in a second call to get those. But you will get more data, and you can query more data. So it's a little strange the way that API works, but there are reasons for it, and I wanted to explain those reasons. So we'll come back to the APIs here in a minute. I want to go through a couple of the other topics before we move on. So analytics error handling. Our team has gone through and really documented how you should do retries and not hammer away at the system. Our analytics API is, compared to some other contact center platforms that I've had experience with in querying, this one, we're reasonably pretty good at banging away on the analytics API. It is mostly a polling type, make a request, get a response system, and you can query it pretty frequently. I wouldn't hammer away at it every second or every couple of seconds, but you can, every 30 seconds to go get some data would be all right. Keep in mind, you have a real live production contact center running against this, and you're hitting the same data store that the microservices are hitting. So you want to keep in mind, if you're building queries, only go get that data at the frequency that you really need it at, not at the ultimate frequency that you can get it at. So you don't want to affect the production system. So Julie, you asked, how often does a job query async? Does a job query async? Not sure I totally understand what you're asking there. How often does a job query async? So maybe you're asking how frequently you can query, which is maybe what I was just talking about. With the asynchronous, you could query it, right? But you're waiting for the results to come back. So making a second query, unless it's going after different data, it may not make sense to ping away before you get the response to your asynchronous query. I hope that answered your question. If not, maybe post it in a different way. I'll try and get that answered. So error handling, come and look at how we would like you to handle error handling. We have an analytics integration guide. So we've actually kind of done some legwork for you by going through and looking at the use cases that customers have come to us with, asking us, hey, how do I go about getting this data? we've tried to document those use cases here and make some recommendations on the best approach that we think you should take to go get that data. So, you know, this is a good guide. If you're probably not the first person to try and go after data in our system. Somebody else has probably asked that question. And like I said, we tried to document those here and give you advice on the best way to go about getting that data. We talked about the jobs queries. So we've got conversation details jobs and user detail jobs to go after that ETL'd data that's offline. One thing about the jobs query, if you didn't catch that, we ETL that every night, right? So it's always a day behind. You can't query using the jobs query to get data from today. It's just not in the data store. It hasn't ETL'd yet. It hasn't run for that current day until the nighttime, until the low time of your business operations. Then we'll ETL that data out to the backup data store. So just be aware of that. Conversation wrap-up handling. So we talk about how we handle that in analytics. Dimensions. So if you're going after those, dimensions are the where clause. So think of this as a database, as a SQL database. It's not really SQL. We're not using SQL, but you can think of the query as that. You're going to have the select, what do you want? Ordered by, where, and the where is the dimensions. It's what are the keys you're going after. And so we've broken out our dimensions by, we've got conversation dimensions, we've got call flow dimensions, transcript dimensions, journey dimensions, the different attributes that you can query on to go after and get the data that you want. We talk about flows. We've got certain APIs just for flows. How we group data, so we can flatten data or we can not flatten data. So we talk about how the grouping works. We have details on our metrics, how we count things, how we determine our metrics from the raw data, and then what those metrics are, again, by category. So if you're going after those observation queries or the aggregate queries, these are the metrics that might be returned. And this is more about the notifications. This is more about the real-time WebSocket API, but you can also get data real-time over a WebSocket, but that's not what we're talking about today. So that's the API. I'd really encourage you, don't do what I do. Go through and read the details about these APIs and even about the specific queries. So if you're going after conversation aggregate query, this article is really great on what's available to you. It even gives you, it should give you examples toward the bottom. Well, here's an example query that you can make. So again, it's kind of like a SQL query broken up into JSON, right? Everything's got an interval. How far back do you want to go? For those that are aggregates, it's how do you want to aggregate every 12 hours? How you want to group things? What fields are you going after? So this is your select. And your filters are your where clause, where media type is voice and where direction is outbound. All right, before I go much further, I'm going to try and make a stab at answering some of the questions that have come in. Where can we find the rate limits for the analytics API? So great question. Let me show you that because that's often overlooked by everybody. So if I go to, let's go look at the post for conversation details query. It's hidden, if you want to think of it that way. Operation, all of our APIs have this operation information and it's collapsed automatically for every API. So expand that and you will see the rate limits for our APIs. You'll see token rate limit per minute. How many can you do per minute given a token? So in this case, you can make 300 requests per minute. What is that? Every 5 seconds. There's another one, client credentials token rate. That again, that's related to this one. One's client credentials grant, one is user token grant. You know, there's other rate limits, but that's where they're at. So Lakshmi. All right, Dan Fontaine, well, when is the data for a previous day guaranteed to be available? Guaranteed. I don't know that it is guaranteed. The ETL jobs run at the low point of operations on your contact center. That's a really good question. I don't know exactly like when they're scheduled. My suspicion is you go into organization settings and you set, I believe you set kind of the hours of operations. We'll do our best not to run those at a peak interval, but if you have a 24-hour contact center, sometimes that's hard and they'll just make a determination. But I do know it tries to run at the low point overnight of most contact centers so that it's available the next day. So Dan, that might be a good one to post into the developer forum. So go to the developer center and down toward the bottom, you'll find developer forum. Go post that question in there and we'll make sure we get that answered for you. I'd actually like to know that answer myself. All right. Is overnight data posted? So Julie, I guess I answered your question. All right. Pete, are there WFM metrics available? I don't believe we have any WFM reports out of the analytics API, but I do think there are some things you can get out of the workforce management API. Query for historical adherence. I don't know what kind of metrics you're going after there, Pete, but I know you can get data directly from the workforce management system and not from the analytics. So it's a little bit separate there. All right, Dan, you asked another one. You kind of touched on the analytics data is not available immediately, but what about when all data for a previous day is 100% available? Not all data is about when all data for a previous day is 100. Again, I'm not sure when the ETL jobs are guaranteed to be done. That's kind of what it sounds like. When will all the ETL data be available in the backup data store? That's a good question. I'd post both of those into the developer forum. Wow, we've got a lot of questions here. Okay. Is there an API for the ETL jobs data? Well, yeah, it's the jobs API endpoints. So it's these analytics jobs. So we've got conversation details jobs and user details jobs. And those are they're in the analytics API. If you just filter by the term jobs, you're going to find the jobs endpoints that you can use to post your query, check on the status of a query, and get the results from the query. So hopefully that answers that. Lakshmi, you asked, again, is the token rate per minute for specific endpoint or applied to entire API? Can I send 300 requests per minute for jobs endpoint or another 300 requests for aggregate queries? It's per token. So if you're getting an access token, you authenticate with OAuth, you get an access token. That's 300 API requests per token, not just for the API endpoint. So that's all API requests for that token. That way we don't get a runaway application hammering away at the API across the board. So Pete, yeah, you were talking about adherence. So I hope you saw that. If you scroll down to workforce management, there was an example of querying for historical adherence. So you can get that right from the workforce management system. You can put a start and end time and get adherence that way. All right, I'm going to have to move on, or I'm not going to get through my presentation, guys. I might have to come back to some of these. For transcripts, download API, is there an option to download in bulk similar to recordings? So for transcripts and recordings and all of that, the transcripts, I don't think we have a bulk way to get the transcripts today. I think you have to go get those one by one right now. Those might get worked into like our S3 integration where we can automatically export recordings and metadata to an S3 bucket. I would imagine at some point they'll hook in the transcripts there too to automatically be included in that integration at some point. But right now, I think you've got to go get the transcripts one by one. All right. I'm going to stop there because I want to get through some of this. So let's talk about using the analytics API right now. So in our developer center, if you go to the analytics API, and I've spent some time, I pointed out the post of conversation details. So we have built into our user interface the ability to create a query. Okay, so this black box over here, you can type directly into here. If you know the properties and everything and the JSON that you want to build, you can paste that JSON in here. You can come over here and you can modify this to be ASC if you know what the values are. If you're not that comfortable kind of changing the JSON directly, you can do it all through the user interface. So we've got a user interface over here where you can see if I want the direction, I've got a direction of inbound and I've got a second detailed query predicate for direction of outbound. Those directly relate to this JSON here. So if I change them over here in this UI, it's going to change them here in the JSON of my query. So in this particular query, I'm looking for everything that happened today. So our dates are UTC based. I'm in the US Central Time Zone, so my offset right now in daylight savings time is 5 hours off GMT. So I tell it I want everything from the 5 hours past the 27th GMT to 5 hours past the 28th of GMT. That'll give me everything for today, for July or June 27th. I want everything ordered descending by conversation start date. So looking at when the conversation started, I'll get everything today, the oldest to the newest, right? Paging. So our API for analytics works on pages. I could put in a page size of 50. That means at max, Genesys will return 50 conversations. If there are more, there will be an additional page. I'll have to repost this query and I'll have to increase the page number to 2 so that I get the next page of 50. And I'll have to just loop through until the returned response shows that I've reached the max page count. Paging is important. Our entire analytics API works that way. You've got these segment filters. So we have different filter criteria. Segment filters are about the conversation data by participant. It'll look at the participant. So that's something I should point out to you guys. We have an article on the conversations. Shoot, where was that? Conversation model, conversation data model. Under the details query, go look at how our conversation data model looks, because it's a little bit different than you would expect if you've worked with other contact center systems. Our data model is participant based, so every human or microservice that touches a conversation is a participant. So we have a participants array. The architect call flow is a participant. The queue is a participant. The agent's a participant. The customer's a participant. Everything that touches that is a participant. So segment filters go look through the participant data. Conversation filters look at the high-level conversation. Like if you were looking for a specific conversation ID, that would be in the conversation filters. And then evaluation filters and survey filters. If you wanted to see all interactions that came back with an NPS score of, 80 or higher. That would be a survey filter. Evaluation filters would be all conversations that were evaluated a certain way by a supervisor. So you can filter, those are your where clauses in that. And this tool, if you scroll on down, and I'm sorry for the scrolling, it's just the way the interface works on our developer center. You'll get to see what the invocation is going to look like, right? This is the request we're going to make to API v2 analytics conversation details query with this payload. And I can actually execute that, and I get the conversations back. I get an array of conversations, and you can copy this and paste this into your editor of choice. Let me bring up new. So I just like working in the editor because I can collapse stuff and everything. But if you paste that into whatever your editor of choice is, and you can collapse things so you can see how many conversations you got back, go through and do searches and whatever. So that data is available to you. Now, the entire analytics API is built to support our user interface. So I want to show you that real quick. Let me make this a little bigger. So in Genesys Cloud, under performance, don't go to reports, because I think we're kind of deprecating that in September. So we moved reports into performance. The functionality is just moving. So if you go to the performance menu and go to workspace, that's the performance workspace dashboards are what use our analytics API under the covers. So Genesys is an API first platform. Everything that we do, we build an API for it first, and then the UI uses that API. We're not hiding anything from you. Everything our user interface can do, you can go get to, well, mostly from an API. So let me do this. Let me close all tabs. Okay. If I go to the performance workspace, I'm going to come up to a view that looks like this. And these are the different performance dashboards that we have. They should look pretty similar to the queries that you see over here: evaluation flow, journey, real-time surveys, etc. For aggregate queries and for jobs queries and for observation queries. You're going to see all those listed over here. Our own user interface is calling those same systems, so we make those available. The ones I use the most, interactions is my go-to one, just because I work in interactions all day. Your supervisors, your administrators of Genesys Cloud, they're probably going to want queue observations and things like that. They're going to want to know who's online on a certain queue, how many agents are online and available and taking calls, and what's their average handle time, and all of that. So we'll go to the queues here in a minute. But when you're doing like testing and you want to see conversation data, this is the user interface for it. So this is making the call to the conversation details query. You can come over here to the far right and go to filters. You can query by media type. I only want to see media types of calls, and I only want to see calls that were a certain duration or had a certain flow output or went through a certain queue. Maybe I only want to see calls that went through the customer support queue, which are all I only test on my queue called customer support. So you can build a query that you like, get the data that you want returned. And let me show you, if I go to my developer tools from the browser, let me shrink this down a little bit so we can see them both running here. So I've got a query built. I'm going to look for things from the customer support queue that only calls, right? If I hit, I'm on my network tab of my developer tools. I've cleared everything, and I'm going to hit reload or refresh here, the first hit, the first API request that's made is the query. And so you can see, I know that's small. I'm sorry, Chrome won't let me make this bigger for the developer tools. But it's calling the analytics conversation details query. So you can see the API, it's a post, and you can see the payload that I'm sending, or the Genesys Cloud is sending. You can see the interval, the description, the paging, all of that. You can even, if you take that, if you go to the raw view, take that value and copy that, you can paste that into the developer tools and you'll get the same data back. So you can see the response that came back is that same data from the analytics API. So we're using our own APIs to get all of that data. So my point is, if you can craft a dashboard that you like, that has the data that you want, and you need to get that out of Genesys Cloud, right? You like it here, but you also need it over here in this other BI tool or something, you know, so you can join it with other data. Craft your query here, look under the covers, get the query that it built, and then put that into your code. Put that into your code and run that, you know, at whatever interval you need. Pull that data out and feed it into your BI tool so that you can join that with your CRM data and your other line of business systems, so that you can create a holistic view end to end of that customer journey, from website to shopping cart to talking to the Genesys agent about their bill, and et cetera. So that's how I work. Same with the queues. So if you go to queue activity, maybe, yeah, queue activity is probably good enough. You can see the different queues that you've got. And if you click, like I do everything on customer support, so I can see all the agents that are logged in. Again, this panel is getting data from the analytics API. So if you ever need to know, how did they get all the agents that were online and available in that queue, and how did they get these metrics? It's all available to you in the developer tools of the browser. If you just go find the queries that are being made, you will find how to make those queries and get that same data so that you can use those in other systems. So, all right, I think I will take a moment here and try and get through some more of the questions here before we go on. So, we got Bruce done. I've been working on getting schedules. It is a complex process to get schedules by date and then get schedules for each date. WFM APIs are confusing and complex. Yes, Bruce, I hear your pain. I'm actually working on a project with somebody right now. We're kind of doing the same thing. We're going after scheduled data. Yes, the APIs for WFM are complex. WFM data is just that way. I don't I don't know how to answer that. It's not really a question as much as it's a statement. But yeah, the data is there. So, but you've got to use the WFM APIs to get it. So is work being done to streamline the APIs for the WFM stuff? Again, that's Bruce. Not that I'm aware of. I will say Genesys is now offering a standalone WFM product. We're calling it Genesys Cloud EX. It's a fairly new offering, just released earlier this year. It's our we're going to use that for Genesys Engage. We're going to sell that to Amazon Connect customers that want a WFM system, and if they like Genesys WFM, they can use that. That might result in some streamlining. I don't know, Bruce. I hope it does. I agree with you. I feel your pain. Does this API still exist to validate that data exists in the data lake? Let's see, you've got an analytics conversation details jobs availability. Look up the data lake availability date and time. That's a good question, Bruce. Hold on. Or no, that was Charles. Let me look at that API. Give me 1 moment. I gotta scroll to the top here. You actually have, oh, jobs availability. Got to spell that right. Oh, because I've got post. Jobs available. Look up the data lake availability date and time. Well, there you go. I think that is the API that will probably tell you when the ETL job is done. What does that give us? So the data so again, we've got the real-time, highly performant data, and then we've got the data that's been ETL'd in kind of our historical, queryable, long-term database. So data availability date, yeah, it looks like at 3:55:29 Zulu of today is when the last ETL job ran. Look at that. I did not know that existed. So good call, Charles. Yeah, I would say that tells you when the ETL data has been completed and is available, and what the cutoff line was, right? What data is available in there. All right, learn something new every day. Is there a guide to how to set up Power BI to use the OAuth credentials? Bruce. I don't think there's a guide to do that. No. Is it possible? Yes. We have an App Foundry vendor, Neurologics. They do everything on Azure. So they're a Genesys partner. I think they're based out of South Africa, but they work globally. They have built some products available on the App Foundry that will pull data from Genesys into Azure, into Power BI. I've even seen, it's super cool. They've got tools that will pull that data out and push it straight in real time live into spreadsheets, into Excel spreadsheets. So you can like place a call, and the minute you hang that call up, it shows up on the Excel spreadsheet, just because Azure, owned by Microsoft, obviously, right, has all these tools, and they can feed all that stuff into Power BI and then into Word or into Excel, and really pretty cool. So if Neurologics can do it, it's possible. Genesys does not have a guide to do that. You might just save yourself some trouble and go to the App Foundry at appfoundry.genesys.com, search for Neurologics. It is Neuralogix. Search for Neurologics and see if their tools are worth it for you. It might save you some development time. All right. Is there any way to pull metrics, Genesys directory groups, and associated communicate level users? Something like how to obtain reporting, inbound calls, outbound calls, which groups are taking calls, etc. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So let me point that out. I'm going to go back to Genesys Cloud for a minute. So all of the data, I'm not sure who asked that question, but all of the data you're asking for about groups and who's taking calls, who are communicate users, etc. All of that is available through APIs. It may not be in the analytics API. If you want to find all users that are licensed for Genesys Cloud 3 license level, that kind of stuff, those are different API queries. You can get it all. You have to look at their roles and permissions. You can query all users and expand on authorization. And you get all the roles assigned and all the permissions, and you could suss out who who's licensed for a certain level that way. But you can combine that with queries from the analytics API to figure out what users are taking calls and what level they're licensed at and what groups they're in and all of that. But it's probably going to take some work to combine all of those different data sources together to create that holistic view that you're looking for. All right, and coming up, we got about 15 minutes left. There was one last thing I wanted to show you. So I mentioned reports. So Genesys, we long ago, so reports have been around for a while. You've been able to set up some canned reports and schedule those to be delivered. And we're going to deprecate that, the report functionality, because we've actually built it into our performance dashboards. So this might be another way, if you didn't really want to work in analytics queries, but you wanted to get data out at a scheduled time every day. Let's say you wanted to get the raw data of interactions every day, sent to an inbox. Maybe you've got an Outlook inbox monitored by Zapier. Okay, Zapier is kind of like a MuleSoft, a process automation tool. You want data to come into that. Maybe you want CSV data to come into Zapier. You're going to process it with Zapier, and you're going to feed it into some other system, okay, or MuleSoft, or whatever system you want to use for process automation. In the performance dashboards, we have this, it looks like a little download icon. That's the export panel. You can say export, you can give it a name, right? Give it a name. You want the selected columns. So any columns you've set up here, you can pick additional columns, but any columns you set up in the view will be exported. You can send it to email addresses. So again, if you have a process automation monitored email address, you can send it to that email address and it'll receive that as an attachment. You can schedule it to say, every day at 4 a.m. in the morning, run my export and send that email so that you can have that job processed by your process automation and available for your users when they come in the morning. There's some additional options that you can set up for time zones and formatting of dates and stuff. But you click the export button, and this is running real time. I asked it to real-time export that data, and it says the file will appear in your inbox. So that doesn't mean my email inbox, because I didn't fill out an email address here. I just left that blank. Genesys Cloud has an inbox. I don't know how many of you use that, but it has an inbox, and it has various things that show up in your inbox, like voicemails you might have gotten, or faxes, or recordings that were left for you. One of the things are the exports. So if you want to go after those interactions, you can download, oh, right here. It's this one. I've already downloaded this one. You can download that. It'll download the CSV to your local machine. You can go play with that CSV locally, or you can, like I said, you can have an email address that it goes to outside of Genesys, so you don't have to go manually pull it. So this looks like this one's still running. I just have to wait for that. So that export that I ran is still running because it's running offline. But that's another way that you could go get data. Maybe you don't need to write a Node.js app that runs at a scheduled time, you know, a scheduled Lambda or something like that that's going to run and pull that data every night. Maybe you just want to feed that into a system that's going to automatically consume a CSV file. That might be an easier integration as long as you schedule that report of that data. It'll keep this filter, the filter criteria that you set up. When you create that, that's what's going to be exported. And then you can take that data and process that maybe a little more easily than writing an app, maintaining an app, and parsing JSON. So just a thought, we don't all have the luxury of infinite time. Sometimes our deadlines are, I need that report yesterday. And, sometimes maybe just getting a CSV file exported to you via email might be the easiest, fastest mechanism to accomplish that task. So let's see, are there any other questions? Haven't seen anything come into the Q&A. So I I wanted to dig deeper into this, like each one of these topics, just conversation details queries themselves. I could spend a whole hour talking about the nuances of conversation details query and how to build the proper filter criteria to go in and get that, or bot interactions, how many bot invocations happened and how many of those converted into an actual interaction, how many escalated and all of that. Those kind of details are available to you, and each one of those could be a DevCast topic in itself. But I hope that through this one, I've given you the places to go look, where to find that information, how to use the developer forum to answer, to ask questions if you do have questions about the analytics. Maybe you don't even have to post a question. So like I said, you're probably not the first person to come in and try the analytics API and have a question. If you just search the forums, my guess is your question has probably already been asked and answered. So you might just search on the developer forums and find maybe the answers to the questions that you have about the analytics API. But we're here to help you. Post onto the forum, use the analytics APIs, get that data out into your systems, and help your contact centers get access to the metrics and KPIs that they need to be able to do their jobs. So with that, I'm not getting any additional questions. So I think we will wrap up this DevCast for now. And we have not settled on the topic for July yet. So if you have a topic, you can email me. You can email Janessa Barrera at genesys.com. You could post into the forum that you'd like a certain DevCast topic done, and we'll see that come in. So with that, I will wrap this up, and we will see you toward the end of July with our next DevCast. Y'all have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.